Hello, everybody. I am David Shipley Alexander. This is a prelude to actually two videos on the same topic. The first one we did outside here in beautiful southern Montana, but we had a high wind today, and the audio therefore has problems, even though the visual was perfect. So we did it again inside. So that will be following the first one, where the audio inside will be perfect. So here we go. Hello, everybody. I am David Shipley Alexander. Welcome to my Infinite Energy series on YouTube. This is video 10, and I give it a subtitle, The Principle of Infinite Energy. Here I am in southern Montana. Emigrant Peak is visible behind me. Beautiful scenery. In front of me is a mystery. And that mystery comes from a friend challenging me to see if I could find a principle of infinite energy that would apply to all these different technologies that they all look different from each other. But do they have something in common? So in order to be able to do this, I have lined up the data in a chart, such as I show at this time. So the parameters being looked at are the name of a technology and the years that it was developed or made public, a brief description of it, what it is called the over-unity ratio of either power or energy as appropriate. That's the outs divided by the ins, how long it runs, any unique properties of it, and what kind of fields it has, like electric fields, magnetic fields, what kind of motions it has, what kind of transients, what kind of geometry. Most of what we look at, we would call Euclidean linear geometry, but some things have a fractal geometry. Was it disclosed and replicated? And references. The references are given below the video. So the first one I'm talking about here is the one I called the Graphite Rod Experiment. And this is exclusively covered in video number 9. I recommend that you look at video number 9, and that gives a very complete description, as much as I could describe about it. But basically, DC current from heavy-duty batteries was running through a small piece of graphite and heated it to white-hot incandescence. The output light and heat was carefully measured, and so was the input electric power, and even accounting for a slight heat coming from the combustion of the graphite, the out over in ratio was 1.41. It only lasted 10 seconds. Then the batteries were so depleted they could no longer maintain the white heat temperature of the graphite. The types of fields involved here were electric. Of course, where you have electric current, there's a magnetic field. And any motion must have been microscopic, of an expansion of the graphite. Transients, there was some electrical noise in the output signal, or the voltage applied signal. The geometry was regular Euclidean. Disclosure, yes. See video 9 and the reference under that. The replication, yes, it was done a number of times. And the references are, as I said, under video 9. The second device I'm talking about today was called the Moiré device, and that was publicly demonstrated by Dr. T. Henry Moiré in the 1930s. He had basically a wooden box about 2 feet long, 1 foot high, 1 foot wide. It contained a special plasma tubes with no known input, but yet he was producing enough power to power several kilowatts worth of electrical equipment, lights, heaters, motors. So he would take a visitor in his car, drive out in the desert beyond Salt Lake City, so there were no power lines to induce power from, and then give a demonstration that after he tuned some circuits in the box, that device produced power. The only field that might be involved there, he never got a patent, but he did get a patent on the what he called electrotherapeutic tubes, and the patent described that they were coated on the inside with a uranium compound. So the radiation at that level has almost no energy output, maybe nanowatts, but that might have catalyzed something. I'm just speculating on that. So the transients would be the actual emission of the radiation as separate alpha, beta, gamma particles, or waves, geometry standard, and the output over input ratio, of course, is infinity because there is no known input. And the disclosure, unfortunately, Murray took the core secrets of this to his grave. He did not disclose anything, didn't get out there. But we do have that many people saw what he demonstrated, and they gave notarized statements that it did what Murray said it did. And that's referenced underneath the video. The third one, the third technology for today, was done by Dr. Peter Greneau and his son, also Dr. Neil Greneau. Most of their work was done at MIT in the 1980s. And basically they had a high voltage capacitor bank all charged up, and they fired that through a metal tube about 6 inches high, half-inch inside diameter. It was filled with pure water and a spark plug in the bottom. When they fired that capacitor, it didn't make steam. What it made was cold fog that was emitted out of the tube at a very high velocity. They took high-speed movies of it, and they said it was about 1 kilometer per second. And not only that, it was able to, the kinetic energy of that was able to penetrate through a 1/4-inch aluminum plate. Depending on how they did it, the over unity factor, output over input, varied between 3 and 20. The types of fields, of course, high electric field for the high voltage, and then there was a very high linear momentum in the moving fog when it was emitted. The motion of that, of course, is linear. A transients, of course, the electric discharge was a transient, and the sudden motion of the fog was a transient. Geometry was standard. Disclosure, yes, they were published in a number of peer-reviewed articles, and replication, yes, they did it many times, and the reference is given for that. So this is what we have for today. Coming up in the future, I'm actually planning to be going on 2 tracks. One is a continuation of these presentations and setting it up in a way that a pattern would be evident of these parameters if it's showing up over and over, as well as describing what the technologies are. But the second track is a new one. I have decided to actually hands-on replicate one of the technologies I've been reading about much recently. So I say for now, tune in to the next video to see what that will be. And for now, if you like this, subscribe You push the red button, and then if you see the bell there, you push that, and then you will simply be notified by YouTube when I put up the next video. It's always nice to give me a thumbs up on it. And until then, I am David Shipley Alexander. Welcome back. Here we are again. This is the indoor version of substantially the same video, but it's being done with the perfect sound quality we can get indoors rather than outdoors where we had the wind blowing into the microphone. So again, this is Infinite Energy Series video 10, the subtitle, The Principle of Infinite Energy. And that relates to not only presenting the data on different technologies, which is what this is, but going beyond that, as a friend challenged me to try to find the overall overriding principle of infinite energy. All these devices seem so different, or some of them are similar to others, but is there some one principle that would explain the operation of all of these, which are very non-conventional compared to what could be called standard technology? So the way I have arranged the data is in these parameters, what the technology is, name of it, who did it, when, description, very brief description here, the very important over unity ratio, or outputs divided by the known inputs, duration, how long it lasts or runs, unique properties, the types of fields involved, electric, magnetic, so forth, types of motion involved, what are called transients. Now that talks about something that happens in a very short period of time, something like an explosion or something like a spark plug firing, which is milliseconds or sometimes microseconds. The type of geometry, where what we would call Euclidean linear geometry, is the standard objects we look at, measure, but some of these work by what's called fractal geometry, which is quite different. Whether it's been disclosed or not, whether it's been replicated or not, and the references. So we start with what I call the Graphite Rod Experiment, which has been very extensively covered in video 9. I recommend you watch video 9. In that technology, the current comes from batteries, DC current, and it heats a piece of graphite white hot. The heat and light coming off of the graphite were carefully measured, and the electric power going into the graphite was carefully measured, and even taking into account a slight amount of heat produced by the combustion, very slight combustion of the graphite, the over unity ratio was 1.41. It only lasted 10 seconds, and then these were heavy duty batteries that they were so depleted that they could no longer maintain the white hot temperature of the graphite. The types of fields involved were electric, and where you have that much current, of course, a magnetic field, any motion would have been microscopic, such as the expansion of the graphite due to the very high temperature. There were some transients in the output, some spikes in the electrical recordings, and the geometry was standard Euclidean linear. Now this was disclosed. You look at the reference under video 9. It's the same as that, and it was replicated a number of times, and the reference is below, but it's also the one under video 9. The second technology was known as the Moiré device. This was extensively publicized by Dr. T. Henry Moiré in the 1930s. what he would do was take his device, which was in a wooden box about 2 feet long, 1 foot high, 1 foot wide. It was filled with a series of cold plasma tubes, and he would take that in his car with some electrical equipment such as irons, heaters, motors, lights, with a visitor, take that out in the desert away from where he lived in Salt Lake City to show that he was not inducing power from power lines. And then he would make some connections inside the box, hook up these devices that consumed electric power, and the over unity ratio was infinity because there was no known input going into the box, but yet there was electric power coming out of it that ran the devices. It would run continuously, it ran cold, and the only clue, a speculative clue, but the only one we have to explain what was going on was that he got no patent on this technology, but Murray did get a patent on what he called electrotherapeutic tubes, and that patent described that the inside of the tubes was coated with uranium compounds. So they would provide not only a linear motion, but the separate emissions of alpha, beta particles, and gamma rays would be transient events. Standard geometry. It's very unfortunate that Dr. Murray disclosed very little about the key inner technology making it work. He took that to his grave with him. The references are below, and the only explanation would be that possibly the radiation was catalyzing something going on inside the tubes, which operated cold, but they had plasma like glowing argon gas inside the tubes. The third technology was the water discharge experiments done by Dr. Peter Greneau and his son, Dr. Neil Greneau. Most of that was at MIT in the 1980s. And it was their water discharge experiments. And basically they had a high voltage capacitor bank, which they fired through a spark plug in the end of a short metal tube, about 6 inches high, half-inch diameter, filled with pure water. And what was produced was not steam from the water, but a cold fog coming out, expelled at a very high velocity, about 1 kilometer per second. So dividing the kinetic energy of the water as a cold fog divided by the electrical energy stored in the capacitor, they got over unity ratios between 3 and 20, depending on how they did it. It was a single shot, so we compare energy to energy to get that ratio. And the fog had enough kinetic energy it could punch a hole through a 1/4-inch aluminum plate. The fields were, of course, electric, and then a linear momentum field for the moving fog. Of course, there were transients. The firing of the discharge through the spark plug was one transient, and then the sudden emission of the cold fog was another transient event. They both happened very suddenly. The geometry was standard, and the disclosure that work was published in a number of peer-reviewed journals, and they replicated it many times, and the references of these are below. So I will be now continuing on 2 tracks. One will be the presentation of more different technologies in which I'm also looking for a pattern of something that appears in all of these technologies, which would be the overriding principle of infinite energy. But secondly, I'm also going to be going on another track where I have been reading about a particular technology, which I will be replicating that with some help from others, doing that hands-on and reporting on that in a series of videos. So stay tuned to see what I'll be doing next. And if you like this, a thumbs up is very nice. If you push the red button to subscribe, it opens up and you see a bell in there, and then push that and you will be notified by YouTube when I put up the next video. So until then, stay tuned. I am David Shipley Alexander.